other thing on that side where everybody comes down to these very conservative numbers, like 10, 15 megabits something, looking at the stats for our user base on on Quest, half the people have 40 plus megabits and like a quarter of the people have 80 plus megabits streaming to our headsets, and that's with a very conservative estimate where you do multiple simultaneous streams and it can go up much higher than that. So there's possibility of streaming exquisitely high quality content to our existing headsets. We are not right now close to even saturating our displays in most cases. So there's a lot more that can be done there. Now, there are so many applications that are sort of thin wrappers around a little bit of immersive media, and that does seem fairly wasteful because none of them do the things right, almost none of them do things right in terms of getting it on layers and getting the sRGB sampling and all the picky little things there. And it does feel like we want to move towards a world where more of that is done in the web, where the web browser experience is better UI than practically every third-party application. It is on a layer with sRGB filtering at the right pixel scale, and if you make a web UI, it's just going to look better than whatever you cobble together in Unity. But right now, the options for playing the immersive video is just not so great on the web. There's the web VR players that people kind of use as a standard really do none of the things right in terms of all of the high-quality things. So they work, but it's not the quality experience that I want to put forward. So I want us to do more of that natively in our browser. But I've been told by a number of people that the web standards communities get really defensive and up in arms at having certain web tag extensions by specific vendors, and if we just go make Oculus-specific extensions, here, play this immersive video, automatically switch to the right projection, do everything right, and it's a magic Oculus tag, that they will be mad at us, and we might even be shunned from future standards bodies stuff, and we have to just go through this long, slow standardization process. And not a lot of progress has been made on that. So that's been frustrating for me because I'm sort of the, just go make it happen, get her done, and we'll sort it out later. So on the social side, it's, looking back, it's kind of embarrassing at all the stages that we've gone through this at Oculus. Like, way back in the early days, I did the social APK on Gear VR so you could co-watch Twitch and some of the movies and things. And then we had spaces on Rift and rooms on Gear and Go, and venues and co-watching, and now we have Facebook Horizon. And our avatars have continuously mutated from the little floating heads through 3 different versions of things, and we have the codec avatars on the horizon, and we do not have this well sorted out at this point. And by the way, I am really sad about the fact that we are going to wind up deprecating rooms. The servers will eventually get shut off, I think at the end of this year, which I do think is a shame because rooms can run like on Quest with the Gear VR or the Go emulation. A number of people find some value in it, but it's not showing any significant growth. It's trailing down, and they want to focus efforts on the kind of the larger bets for things. But other things that are social in terms of kind of breaking the isolation of VR, and I'm still the champion of the power of isolation. I like isolation for a lot of things, but it's it's kind of the antithesis of the Facebook message of bringing people together. So we keep firing these social bullets at things to try to get a hit. But some of the kind of outside VR things, the asynchronous social aspect, and it's worth noting that the very first time I met Mark Zuckerberg, we were talking about kind of synchronous gaming and play, and he was very much touting the power of asynchronous social things, which is what Facebook is. And having some of the things, the most powerful social thing by far for me that we've done is notifications of Beat Saber scores. Waking up, it's like, Sean Liu beat your score in Beat Saber. Oh yeah, we'll see about that. That's been like, that's the notification that I like to see, and it does do exactly what it's supposed to do. It makes you want to go grab the headset, get back into the game, and play. It's pure win there. Then we have, we've made a lot of progress on casting, and in fact, I ran into some people that were still thinking the way casting was a year ago, barely working in various ways. There have been a couple rounds of improvements for things. We have we've improved the quality in a few different ways, but we still have a lot more that we can do here. Like during my app reviews, we randomly lose casting a couple times during that. It has some kinds of reliability problems. There's still more latency and more quality loss than we'd like to have. There's other options like Miracast that we're looking at, the possibility of streaming to arbitrary web browser. Somebody mentioned they'd love to be able to cast over a plugged-in USB cable when they're in sort of convention Wi-Fi death zones for things, and those are all good, good ideas. And we've got this. We need to combine, kind of converge all the different things that we do with video, where we have live streaming to Facebook, we have our different casting approaches, and we have recording to files, and you'd like to have just an advanced options page that lets you change frame rate, resolution, bit rate, all those different things in a uniform way around all of it, because there's a bunch of value to have there. And then back to sort of the Gear VR days of, I loved one reviewer that said the most fun thing to do with VR is to show other people VR, and we still are not at the perfect spot with that, where in many ways Gear VR was sort of the best thing. It was before we had a recenter dialogue for it on Go or Guardian on Quest, and we need to work out how to get back to that so that you can just hand the headset to someone, they put it on, and nothing pops up, nothing gets in the way of their experience, and they're just dropped in exactly where you want them to be. We have some other neat effects now, like the ability to, from the companion app, launch applications for them. It's like, hey, look at this. And kind of going back to what I was saying about load times, imagine those sessions when you're working on your title. You've made something cool, you want people to show it. Let's say somebody's in a room showing all of their friends VR. They say, hey, I'm launching this awesome game. And then you have to sit there and make small talk while they're sitting there for a minute sometimes to get the game loaded into where it's actually new and interesting. We have some neat new features with deep linking that can send people to specific places in the games. So we can do this from our Explore feed or from various web links, which is another nice thing that kind of gets you into things faster. And related to that, about the value of people being able to show other people VR. I saw a tweet that said this that I thought was really kind of pithy and true, where they said, AR looks better in videos than in real life, but VR looks better in real life than in videos. And I think that all of us that have actually used headsets of different kinds like that, there's some real truth to that, where the magical world that that Michael Abrash always talks about, our future of the AR headsets and the holographic workers and everything there, that's not what AR actually looks like today when you try on the headsets. And everybody's seen cool game trailers about gameplay on flat screens, and honestly, a lot of the VR games look less impressive than your modern console games. But you put someone in the headset experiencing that, and it's a really different thing. So productivity side of things is another aspect that we're not specifically pushing at all with Quest, but I keep hammering home that it's a universal platform. Anything we plan on doing for any SKU, anything in the future, we should be doing it on Quest right now. Even if we don't market it as such, it should be good for that. Now, one of the areas where people are actually making money right now and having successful businesses is in various enterprise training applications. And there's an interesting split between a lot of things can be done very well just with like with Go and FreeDOF, and then there are some specific training things that like go find this part, go put this part here, pull this breaker there, that work very well with the Quest controllers. So there are there's a good-sized ecosystem of real companies that are serving real customers and and having a great deal of value. I was super excited to see that stat in the keynote about the surgery readiness rates in VR training versus non-VR training. There's some real value to be had there. Now, I had written a remote desktop application a couple years ago and did a lot of experiments with that early on. I'm actually really happy with the commercial remote desktop app available on Go and Quest. When I say like 99 out of 100 apps don't do the right thing for quality presentation, that's one of the ones that does do the right things for it. That's up on a layer, using the super sampling. Every time I put in some neat new option like high quality distortion mesh, it was immediately used there. Lots of options and configuration, so that's really nice. We have a lot of work internally going on to try to automate or to make virtual meetings. We're like, I'm in Dallas, most of the company is in Menlo Park or Seattle and London, all these other places. So we live a lot on video conferences, and they're often not a great experience. There's a lot of value that we can imagine saying, my normal thing is I've got somebody projecting their desktop there, and then everybody else is scrunched down to this tiny little mess of pixels, and I don't even recognize people when I actually meet them at OC6 because, oh, you were those 64 pixels that I saw in the video conference all the time. But if we can get to this point where you get the big screen here for what you're looking at, but you have large views of the other people on conventional video conferencing there, and then you may have other people actually joining in VR with avatars, I think there's some real value there. There's a little more debate over what the value of actual collaborative productivity work is, where that's sort of the science fiction, high fidelity future of, well, we're all going to work together in VR. But I kind of fall back onto my isolation introvert thing where I don't so much want to do that. And it's not clear that going to the places where you're expecting everybody to wear a VR headset is necessarily the best bet. But we are running those experiments and starting to dog food them ourselves internally at Oculus. There have been some of the things that are still a damn shame where VR shell environment, where all of our first-party apps are done, our Oculus Video and browser and library and home, all those different things. We still don't have a public SDK for it. We are, I think, beginning to let some enterprise customers do some things there, but internally, it's still looked at. We're not as serious as we should be about the API and the app model that it was kind of put together roughly. But I think we've done ourselves a disservice there, where so many of these video applications would have been much better done as a really simple shell application, high-quality user interface, high-quality player, and they would just be tiny, tiny applications, rather than spinning up all of Unity to do some of those kind of basic kind of media and display presentations. Some other things that were lacking that are obvious on Android phones, like no ability to do local file management. This was a thing I ran into relatively recently. I had just finally gotten my last Expert SS on OST 1 and 2 on Beat Saber. I'm like, I'm going to record my kind of brag scoreboards and then upload it to Twitter. But it turns out, well, you can't actually have a file browser inside our browser right now, so you can't go and find something. So that's a clear case. If we're going to be doing productivity things, you have file management that you need to do. You need to push things around. So there's a lot of different things there. Now, on the user experience, just kind of the general purpose side of things, there's still hundreds and hundreds of things to fix. And I swear I think a lot of people just tune me out now when I write these long lists of like all the nitpicky little details and things that should be getting better. I encourage everyone to use the user voice website. We really do look at that, and it lends so much more credibility to my arguments when I can say 500 people also think this is a good idea, and I can harp on it a little bit more internally. So I'm proud of how many of them that we have knocked off, where the first couple pages of things on the Quest, a lot of those are handled now, and we've done a lot based on that. So I want us to keep digging all the way down through there, but definitely go in, make your voice heard, and kind of vote up things that are there, or if you've got specific issues, write it up yourself and point me at it. I'll be happy to kind of take a look at things, and if there are things that I haven't considered, I can kind of advocate for them elsewhere. So having a UI that just brings joy, that feels like it's happening instantly and it's doing your bidding, and we're not there yet. I was harping just last week about like how long library takes to open up, and I made this comment during my app review. So I'm going to library after each one of these things to do it, and I'm twiddling my fingers for a little while, waiting for it to come up, saying this should have been instant. This should have just happened. The harangue that I make internally is like moving these images around, drawing this text. I could do this on like a 200 megahertz Dreamcast or something. We've got a 2 gigahertz processor with all this modern stuff. There's no excuse for it to be as slow as it is. But it's what happens to applications. If you have a live app that you've been working on for a couple years, maybe you did a performance pass at one point and got it down to a good level, but features get added, things get changed, moved around, and just everything gets slower. It's the natural state of software, and it takes, you need to fight that aggressively and violently when possible. Make things happen. Aim for things changing on the next frame. You want it to feel like a crisp video game, not some laggy application that will eventually get around to responding to what you've asked it to do. Some of the things that have been improved, The Guardian is a problem for that pass-around VR side of things, where I do wish that we could, if you put it on quickly, we'd just put the kind of the baseline, kind of floor outline of things out. But we've made some improvements. The Pass-Through Plus is a nice change, where early on, again, we had some people thinking that the pass-through video was going to be deeply uncomfortable, that it would make people instantly sick, because it's coming from, the cameras are down here, not where your eyes are, and when you're putting that up there, everything has this shrunken down feel to it, because it's like you've got a much wider IPD, and like you look at your hands and they feel oddly distant from where we're rendering the controllers or where your proprioception sense thinks they are. So the Pass-Through Plus is doing kind of classic stereo depth determination from the cameras, and it fits in. It takes a little without mixing it with other things very much. So it's a decent little comfort value there. Power management is still something that it's great as a consumer device that people actually use. Battery life and batteries that I don't understand. You say, I want to get this app. It spends longer preparing to download, and sometimes it takes to download, and then longer still to actually install before you get into things. And again, we've been hit over the head with the importance of friction and getting into experiences, the value of that. We should be making this really high priority to smooth all those things out. And there's stuff like that we want very much. Like you should be able to have, people talk about you're isolated from your phone when you're in the VR headset. Obviously, we would like you to be able to have your phone in VR, but it's not clear how we go about doing that. We would need cooperation from phone vendors to be able to cast the entire screen up there and to work. Maybe there's a way that we can just get notifications forwarded or some kind of halfway situation, but eventually, in the robust future VR world, you expect to be able to do everything that you do on your phone. I mean, eventually we expect AR to replace phones in many ways, but we've got this intermediate period where hopefully people will be spending large amounts of time in VR, and their phones are important. We need to find some way to surface that stuff in there. So I'll probably run out the rest of the time sort of running down the hardware decision tree for future headsets, where we're not going to announce any new products, but you can maybe infer some possible directions that things could go. Now, unfortunately, we don't have sort of the Tony Stark auto fab where you say, I want some of this and some of this, fab me up a headset to test. Internally, we make a pretty good number of test headsets for things, but there are so many different options that you can choose from here about what might be the optimal one. We don't get to test anywhere close to exhaustively, and there's also the significant problem that when you cobble something together for a test, it may be very far from what the consumer experience is. And you may be able to have something that's functional, but it might not really tell you whether it's actually going to be good or not. And sometimes you have to take sort of a leap of faith, where for a long time it was kind of scary how the controller tracking was looking on Quest and Rift S up until not too long before launch, where there was real worries about, is this even good enough to ship? But more progress gets made, and then updates get made, and it turns out really good. And in general, in a lot of these cases, I tell people that there are directions that we could be taking with sensor configurations that I think would be valuable, but a lot of times the tracking teams are a little hesitant because it's scary to kind of take on some of these challenges. But I have a lot of faith in our ability to get these things worked out once we just say, all right, this is what we've got, we're going to make it work. We're going to just kind of keep grinding on it until it is good enough. Now, all the things that you can put in, they're obviously not without cost. You can't just say, well, I want all of these, because you've got price is an issue. I mean, we have some signal on price point where I thought Quest price was going to be more of a detriment relative to Go, but there's the questions of, is this just because we're still selling to the early adopter enthusiasts? I still tend to believe that getting back down to a cheaper price point is really important when we want to have really mass market broad adoption. But we have a few of these signals that for the people that are currently buying our headsets, a little bit more cost might not be that big of a deal. Like we had Gear VR went up when we included the controller, didn't make a difference. More people buy the higher memory SKU of Go than they do the lower memory, and Quest is selling quite well. But there are also the problems of kind of the opportunity cost of when you put something in, where there's this this thinking initially that, oh, hardware is hard, software goes quickly, and that's not always the case. When you get into this, when you're dealing with big systems like computer vision or how you deal with the device drivers in the operating system layer, it was it was an eye-opener for me a few years ago when we were working on early versions of the computer vision tracking. I was doing some experimental work on the PC, and I said, well, if somebody will put together something on mobile for me to work with, that would be great. And one of the EEs actually did cobble some Frankenstein thing together on a Gear VR case that gave me the cameras, and then it turned out that I didn't actually have time to go do the software to actually use it. So we have some of these cases where we have built some headsets that have not been fully exploited because we have not been able to get the software bandwidth to come around and actually take full advantage of the hardware. And then we're still eking out a lot more performance for things on the hardware that we have. I mean, there is actually a lot of, not exactly low-hanging fruit, but there's still fruit to be picked on all of our tracking things on Quest, and I expect it will continue to get better over the rest of its lifetime. So some of the biggest questions that you have is where you split the architecture. We have put everything in the front, which is the most manufacturable, the cheapest, generally the easiest way to set things up, but it makes it front heavy, it can exacerbate cooling problems, and it can have some other challenges where you can imagine wanting to put it in back. Like our very first Proto Quest headset had a big puck on the back with a fan and a heatsink and everything sticking out of it, but the headset was very light. It didn't have any guts up there, so there's some value there. And we continuously talk about, do you put the battery in back? And you'd think, oh, it's just a couple pennies of wire that you have to do to wire it back there, but it's surprisingly impactful on the whole design to do that. Then there's the question of, do you do a split design? Do you have, whether it's a phone or a compute puck of some kind that you have wired down to sit in your pocket, or completely wireless, something where you have just enough processing on the headset to be able to do essentially remote rendering from your pocket? There's trade-offs for all that. The most obvious question for virtual reality is the display questions, where at one level you've got single display or dual display. That impacts whether you can cant the displays. You can get more field of view if you can tilt if you've got wide enough area that it doesn't become really obvious that you're stealing overlap. You can cant the lenses and get more peripheral vision in. If you've got two displays, you can make a nice, clean, interactional adjustment system, where you can still do that on a single screen, where you can still go ahead and have the screen under there and move the lenses on top of that, but that adds some complexity, and if you go to an extreme area, you start trading off your field of view at the end, where you don't have enough pixels to be able to keep sliding it, while if it was two completely separate displays, you've got a lot more options there. Then you've got the question of LCD versus OLED, and we've been kind of flip-flopping back and forth on this across our different products, where LCD is generally cheaper and denser. There are more systems using LCDs. You can generally get a little bit higher pixel density. The OLEDs tend to cheat a little bit with pentile layouts. They have some other reasons to do that, for like blue sub-pixel lifespans. But in general, if you want the highest resolution, you probably get an LCD. Backlights can be brighter, so you've got more opportunity for doing possible high dynamic range things if you have kind of a segmented backlight. And they can be, you may be able to get faster refresh rates in some cases, and subdivided backlights can get back the latency that you would have with normal transition time from the LCDs. The OLEDs offer the things that we touted for so long on Rift, where you have lower latency, they instantly turn on, you've got better contrast where you can have absolutely pure blacks. You can make OLED displays that are flexible, that you can bend into different configurations, which I still think might be useful in some of our optics arrangements. Our current optics people generally say it's like, well, we can handle everything that we need to with kind of changes in the lens's profile. What we would ideally like would be curved on two dimensions, but nobody has made sort of a bowl-shaped OLED display demo yet. That might be interesting. Persistence changes between the two, where the OLEDs, you can command them on and off with sort of microsecond level precision, but they're not all that bright. So if you had a combination of filters or multi-bounce optics or something, OLEDs are hard to do because they don't really get bright enough unless you leave them on for a very long time, then you've got motion blur. While LCDs have They don't transition very fast, so you need to pulse the backlight, but you can make a very bright, shortly pulsed backlight, and that works surprisingly well in Go and Rift S. Now, interestingly, the limit on the refresh rate for Go and Rift S is we run Go at 72 and Rift S a little higher at 80. That display can run higher, like we've had it internally running at 90 frames per second, kind of like the classic Rift, but it's so temperature sensitive where you start off and you've got a clear double image until it really heats up and gets very warm, and then the LCDs are switching fast enough that it can actually run at that rate. So I did look into the possibility of can we change some of these, and in fact, on Quest we've got the issue that the OLED displays that we've got there absolutely can run 90 frames per second, where we had a bake-off early on where we had the same content running at 90 and 72, and we decided to go with 72 because it was just going to be too hard for most content to make 90 frames per second. But some content could, and as we were back to remote rendering now, I'm like, oh, we could do more content there. We could remote render at 90 frames per second. That would be a nice little bonus relative to Rift S. But the display people told me that our FCC certification would be voided if we changed the clock rate on the display. So that's too bad. I don't think we're going to try to recertify the device, but maybe future headsets we will try to crank them up higher than we imagine that we might possibly use, because we would like to have the headroom to be able to maybe change that in the future. There's been some interesting work on kind of diffusers to be able to hide the pixel structure for displays, where if you can blend together, especially you've got the big screen door effect on